How y'all doing, everyone? This part right here we're going to do is Tales of Terror. Last of the 3 horror stories I'm reviewing here, The Enchanted World by Time Life Books. These are just horror stories in general, not in specific like ghosts or monsters, but they will have their share of them. So, let's begin. Beginning artwork, and again, like the other horror ones, it starts with a 1 page with a border onto it. You see some sort of spirits and creatures going around. So, you know, some malevolent spirits, very chaotic looking. Because glare and my lighting is terrible to show all this, but here we go. And the last one. Yeah. Of all the horror ones, this one shows the most of the beginning pages. The Waking of the Dead, with the artwork looks like some form of cemetery. Here. Alright. Here we have here 2 Breton peasants, friends since boyhood, courted the same young woman. No acrimonious word nor jealous gesture passed between them, but the love triangle ended in horror. On the high moor where 2 paths met, a suicide's corpse hung from a cross, a mute reproach to the friend who had been luckier than love. Rank with the stench of his own dead flesh, an unexpected guest arrived late in the wedding, approaching the bridal couple. The revenant demanded one last kiss from the woman who had rejected him. Compelled by vengeful threats, the bridegroom obeyed a command to meet the corpse at the place of his death. Aided by a mysterious night, the survivor averted the fate that awaited him there. Nice 2-pager, a very haunting place. On the bitterest night of a brutal winter, the wagon-driven Mary Job offered a ride to a traveler in distress. But this was no ordinary passenger, as his face remained hidden all the long way home. Let's see. This gruesome tale his gruesome tale recounted, the stranger sank down into the grave that gaped for him. An implacable army. When famine hit the Rhineland, a cruel bishop silenced the hungry populace. He lured them into a barn, locked the doors, and set the place alight. But doesn't end there. See, something awaits him. And across the floor. While the churchman supped on hoarded grain, a pack of rats stole into his palace and ate his portrait out of its frame. Of course, the bishop meets his fate here soon. From an all-empty granaries came thousands of rodents on the march. They stalked the bishop to his hiding place, overcame him by force of number, and sated their hunger on his well-nourished flesh. In the body of the beast. I think I'll skip this one. It's a Jewish tale, very similar to the ghost story I told 2 books ago. Still, interesting artwork all the same, albeit a bit creepy on the faces, you know, the wide eye, open, you know, continuous horror look. Let's see, Harvest of Horrors. Thorgana, a Hebridean woman, came to lodge on a can't read. Thorgana, a Hebridean woman, came to lodge on a bleak Icelandic farm, bringing with her a chest of handsome bed linen. Her hostess, Thurid, ached to possess the goods, but Thorgana would not sell it at any price. Falling onto fields during haymaking, a rainstorm of blood soaked the grass and stained the garments of Thorgunna, marking her out as the victim of the gods' displeasure. She was doomed. When Thorgunna sickened and died, Thurid ignored her last instructions for disposal of her worldly goods. She seized a fine bedcloth before her owner's corpse was cold. Of course. Bearing the dead woman to a distant burial ground, a funeral party stopped to rest at a farm. There, the ghosts of Thorgunna emerged from the shadows to serve them supper. Yeah, a picture of some desert dunes up ahead, but at least it looks like desert dunes. Could be just, mountains at night. A monstrous seal of unknown providence burst out of the earth below the farmhouse floor. Hefting a hammer, Thorid's son battered the creature until it sank into the ground again. Not something you expected out of a horror book. You see someone gazing upon, ghostly figures. All the dead of Froda Farm, victims of violence and disease alike, came forth in winter night to share the food and fire of the living. Beneath the winter stockpiles of dried cod, something unseen thrashed its long and sinuous tail. When it departed, the members of the household found that the mysterious predator had eaten the flesh clean off the fish bones. Let's see. Summoned by the farm's new master to be tried for their crimes, the shades of the dead assembled to be judged and sentenced one by one. The Goblin's guest. Stranded in the wilderness during a storm, a Japanese holy man encountered a woodcutter. Courteously, the rustic offered him shelter against the perils of the night. Let's see. Unable to believe his own eyes, evidence, the priest kneeled to scrutinize the bodies of his host. All 5 heads were missing. In the moonlight clearing, a pack of disembodied heads gobbled insects. Through mouths full of half-chewed carapaces, they gibbered curses and clamored for human flesh. The goblin head clamped its teeth onto the traveler's sleeve, and no amount of force would pry to clench open jaws. When its victims tried to strip off the garments, the head swivered around and bit the flesh of his arm. An unfinished death. And again, I'll skip this story. There's some ghastly images. Whoever that guy is, he's not exactly in mint condition, that's for certain. Apparently some spirit is involved in this. Here we go. Of all the forms of madness that plagued the Arctic tribes, none were dreaded more than the insatiable craving for human flesh. This chapter's Furies of the Far North. A shaman learned from the spirits that his own brother sought to trick him into tasting human meat. Outraged, he wrought the vengeance and plunged his sibling into the pits of horrors. This was always a very creepy one. Victims of infanticide lingered on Earth in a living death. Their angry spirits, known as Engiacs, stole home at night to the nourishment from their mother's breast until they gathered sufficient strength to punish those who had murdered them. Spying the kayaks bearing the uncles who had killed it, the Engiacs stirred the bays into a maelstrom that sucked the men to their deaths and agony under the ice floes. Let's see, blood guilt of a royal house. Suitors of the king of Elis's daughter were forced to compete against the monarch in a chariot race. The prize for victory was a princess. The price of failure was the loser's life. An archway built of prospective bridegroom's skulls stood before the palace as a warning. Very macabre picture here. Thyestes seduced the wife of Atreus, but the cuckold took revenge. He slew Thyestes' children, had their unwitting father to a banquet, and served up their dismembered corpses at the climax of the feast. There we go. Clytemnestra, queen of Agamemnon, helped her lover to murder her royal spouse. She dreamed that she bore and suckled a poisonous snake and knew what the nightmare portended. Her children would avenge their father's death and show her no mercy. Let's see. His hands incarnadined from the mother's blood. Orestes, son of Clytemnestra, fled the Fury's wrath, but these immortal avengers tracked him down and hounded him to madness. I think they mentioned this story in one of the previous volumes. This one, I won't go through the whole story, but this one has captions this time, so I'll read it through. Looks like a story from Norway. In his dimly lit boat shield, the fisherman Elias caught sight of an intruder. His gait was human, but his features were Iliad. And a broken harpoon was embedded in its back. After years of thrift and toil, Elias saved silver enough to afford a better boat. His wife and children joined him on the old vessel's last journey, a winter excursion to the nearest port to purchase a new craft. Homeward bound in the midst of a gale, Elias was impelled to race with a boatload of strangers. The challenger's craft was twinned to his own, save for the inexplicable glow it cast upon the water. Capsized and engulfed by massive waves, only Elias and his eldest son survived, but the sea stayed angry, demanding one final sacrifice. Bride of the Ghost Chief. Now, this one was tempted to read the text just to get the whole story, but it could last a little bit, so I'll just read the captions as normal. Guided by torchlight, the canoes of a wedding party brought a bridegroom from a strange country across the bay to bid for the hand of the chieftain's daughter. On a morning after her nuptials, the bride awoke to find herself embracing a skeleton. The air around her marriage bed was heavy with smoke and the odor of decomposing flesh. Stumbling over human bones, the bride fled to the beach, but the gaily painted canoes had been conveyed her to her new home were nothing but half-sunken, rotten hulks. Maimed and battered, the people of the ghost tribe rose up and pointed accusatory fingers at the stranger who had come among them. Removed from a swaddling before the time was ripe, the child of the girl who married a ghost proved to be no living infant, but an unfleshed set of tiny human bones. That is pretty gruesome. The Kiss of Evil. This is the story of Mesopotamia. There you go. In the belly of a cave beneath the desert floor, the treasure seeker Abdul encountered a door inscribed with a promise of untold wealth and wisdom. Within the chamber, Abdul spied a naked woman seated upon a heap of coins and jewels. Attending her was a silent court of skeletons dangling from the cavern walls. Enslaved by the force he could not exercise, Abdul heard his tongue utter words against his will. They drove his wife away forever, tricked his friends into murder, and lured his son to sudden death. 4 great fishes, razor-jawed, advanced on Abdul when he fell into the river. Before his rescuers could reach him, all his limbs were snapped off and devoured. Languishing at the portal of the mosque, Abdul survived on the charity of strangers who knew him to be a living allegory of greed's evil outcome. I know a lot of times when I read these captions, it doesn't tell the full context of what's going on, but I just don't can't spend a whole video going through the entire book. But I do encourage people to find, if this piques your interest in any way, you can quickly get these copies at Amazon. All right, Demons of the Dream Time. The tribes of Australia knew the seasons for every fruit, the call of every bird, the depth of every waterhole, but they also knew that their land held terrible secrets and harbored creatures that hated humankind. One of these beings was Gar Cain, a jealous guardian of the streaming mangrove forests that fringed Australia's northern shore. All the tribes of the region feared him, though few have seen his form, but it was known that he dwelled alone, without mate or young, and cherished his solitude. The size of a man, Gar Cain had bat-like wings that carried his heavy form from branch to branch. Should any lost child or rash hunter enter his territory, he swooped the rustling wings would shroud the victim, who choked from the stench of his alien flesh, struggled feebly, and then slowly suffocated. Once his quarry lay still, Gar Cain tore the body limb from limb and wolfed them off the raw flesh. And forevermore the spirit of the intruder was condemned to walk in anguish, lost among the great trees and grasses of the region, unable to find his way home to the ancient resting place of his tribe. The Mindai Snake. Being stranger even than Gar Cain wrought evil in Australia's outback. The empty hinterland where the sun beats down on rust-red sand, shimmering salt pans, and ancient eroded hills. Dazzled by the searing light, those people who walked the wilderness knew never to trust the images before their eyes. In the evening, when men, women, and children gathered round their campfires, the hills sometimes seemed to draw closer. The storyteller was warned of a serpent 10 miles long that slid across the land like a moving mountain range. This was the Mindai snake, a terrible instrument, a Punjil creator of all the universe. Transgressors of Punjil's laws listened in dread for the sibilant voice of his servant. When they heard a hissing in the wind, they knew their crime had caught up with them. They dropped their spears and shields, abandoned their dogs and their children, and ran for cover into the bush. But there was no escape. Those who had sinned, violated taboos, or otherwise incurred their Creator's wrath were easily flushed out. The avenging serpent could see and hear for many miles in all directions and moved with a speed that belied his massive size. His victim's fate was always the same. Crouched in the hiding holes, they felt drops of the burning rain and looked up to see cavernous jaws dripping venom. But he saw nothing else, for the Mindai's bite was swift. Heavy-bellied, the serpent would slide away to wait until the Punjil's summons. The Devil Dog. Let's see. Position that a little better. That's going to have to do. When hot winds howled across the outback, a terrible transformation sometimes took place amid the swirling sands. Somewhere out of sight, a creature who wore the shape of a man lay down and let the drifting sand blanket him. When he slept until the storm abated. When the shriek of a butcher bird pierced the air, the crust of the dune that hit him trembled and broke. Sand streamed from the bristling muzzle, a lolling tongue, a fanged jaw. Irinja, the devil dog, big as a dune, as a dune itself, rose hungry for flesh. Tailspinner spoke of a certain hunting party that left one of their number to continue in chase when they made camp for the night. As the lone hunter tracked his quarry, he could hear his comrades' songs. Then a natural silence fell. Alarmed, he sped to the camp and found nothing but a great pool of blood. He felt the scorching breath on his shoulders and found himself staring up at the red eyes of the giant devil dog. Irinja leaped, but the hunter slashed with his knife. The blade sliced through fur and flesh from ear to ear. The creature's victims tumbled out, still alive from his torn throat. At that, Irinja fled into the darkness, running first on all fours, then on two, shrinking with each step he took. He shed his canine hide, his incisors and blood encrusted claws. Man-shaped once more, he stumbled across the dunes until he fell. In time, blowing sands would cover him over and he would sleep, waiting for a cry of the butcher's bird. The Wowie. Drives of Australia Riverlands told of a season when their ancestors were plagued by an unknown destroyer. Young men went on walkabout and never returned. Mothers woke to find their children snatched from their sides. Men standing sentry were seized if their weary eyes closed for an instant. After many such losses, a search party scouring the banks of a nearby river came upon blood-soaked rocks and churned sandbanks. Then they sighted their enemy, sunning itself on an outcrop. Shaped like a lizard 20 feet long, it supported its great weight on 6 legs. Its face was hideous, its mouth capacious enough to swallow a man in one gulp. The terrified witnesses fled. The monster, with the tribesman's name, which the tribesman named Wowie, always struck while its victims slept. One night it lumbered toward the campfire and devoured everyone around it, 60 souls in all. Summoning up their courage, hunters from all the neighboring encampments traced the beast's claw prints to a cave in the riverbank. Knowing that the Wowie would be sluggish after gorging, they stacked green wood at the mouth of the cave and made a fire of smoke to smoke the reptile out. Soon the earth jutted as the Wowie coughed and lurched toward fresh air. When a great beast staggered from the cave opening, the hunters plunged their spears at its side and battered its head with clubs. Roars filled with the valley and then faded away in a gurgling groan. At last the Wowie was no more, but many years of rain and wind were needed to wear away the blood that stained its trail. Here we come across the last story. I don't know, how big is... a little lengthy there. Let's see what we got here. Let's see, this is called The Healer's Secret. Captions on this. When a Spanish peasant vowed to find his son a powerful godparent, Death herself volunteered to hold the infant at the font. As a gift to her godchild, Death offered an herb that would heal the sick, however grave their melodies. But she gave strict instructions for its use, and warned the youth that he would go ill with him to flout them. Furious at his disobedience, Death warned the godson that he would not be given a second chance to countermand her wishes. Though he had risen to be the greatest physician in the land, the young man learned that his powers were useless when his godmother saw fit to claim his royal fiancé. In a cavern wilderness, burning candles marked the length of human lives. When Death decreed it, the lights of the two lovers guttered and went out. And that is Tales of Terror. I know I've been running this one a little bit shorter, and Night Creatures just a little bit longer than that. I kind of rushed through them. But again, I don't want to read all the stories here, but yes, I do encourage you to find these wherever you can and add them to your collections. That is Tales of Terror. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.